My name is Erik Van Horn. I bought my first franchise in my 20s, and since then, I've owned 6 brands with 25 stores in 8 states. I've also helped 1,000 people find the right franchise for them. People like us who are not cut out for the 9-to-5 and like to work smarter, not harder. How do we find the right franchise, buy it, grow it, sell it, and how do we do it in a way to own the business without it owning us? Those are the questions, and I'm on a mission to give you the answers. Welcome to Franchise Secrets. Welcome to the Franchise Secrets podcast with your host, Erik Van Horn. And today's guest is Stan Friedman, who I had the opportunity to be on his podcast a while back. But Stan Friedman's passionate about franchising. I don't know if that means he loves franchising or if that's even a greater thing about franchising, but he's passionate about franchising. He's had past leadership positions that include C roles at Blimpie International, Wing Zone, Maggie Moo's, and Tutor Doctor. He's had years of experience in franchise development, and that's uniquely prepared Stan for his role as president of FRM Solutions. He's always been an out-of-the-box thinker, and he produces a podcast called Franchise Today. Everyone should check that out. It's a live weekly podcast, and then you can check it out on the normal podcast channels as well. Plus, he's doing some really cool things in masterminding for franchisors. I'm super excited to have you on today, Stan. Welcome to the show.
Erik, it's a pleasure. It was a pleasure having you on Franchise Today. And I'm glad you had a good time because turnabout is fair play. And you could have gotten me with a gotcha today, if not, right?
Oh, there will be for sure. So I always like to ask this question. How did franchising find you? Now, I don't
wait a minute now. A little plagiarism here.
But really, that's a question that you ask on your show consistently. And I think it's a fantastic question. And I would like to flip the script and ask you, how did franchising find you?
I've got found by franchising before you were born. It must have been 1987, 88. It was 88. I was in Fort Lauderdale. I was still in broadcast. I was in radio. I had a whole long career in radio before I ever got into franchising. And my wife and I were not yet married, but we were on our way to that. And she was very opposed to my radio career, hated the life that I lived. And literally, she was right. It was a week to week. You lived your life in 13-week cycles governed by Arbitron rating books. Your formats change, everything in your life can change every 13 weeks. So hardly a stable way of living. And she wasn't really interested in me continuing that career if we were going to continue our career. And so I had an opportunity to interview for a position with a company that was offering me a great deal less money than I was making in broadcast. But they wanted to put me into a program to teach me how to market and offer franchises to real estate brokers that were large independent real estate brokers in their respective markets, guys who would pound their chests thinking that they were the franchise. But in fact, this was early days of a company called Remax, and Remax was scooping up all of the top producing real estate agents in any given market, and independent brokers were finding it harder and harder to compete to get the quality agents to come work under their flags and under their banners. So my role was to be able to walk in, go toe-to-toe with a high-powered real estate broker who deemed himself to be the franchise and help him understand why franchise was something he needed, not something that he was. And I did this for a company called ERA Franchise Systems, which is ERA Real Estate. Worked other brands along the way in my early career days in franchising, worked for the Prudential, and that was how franchising and I found each other. I was brought into this program where prior to Zoom, prior to online meetings, you had to learn to do a standing flip chart presentation for 3 hours in front of a broker. And it was quite a learning curve. I made very little money in this process of learning, but my wife insisted this was the best career move I could ever make. And guess what? She was right then, as she usually is every day since. And that's how franchising and I connected.
So was the first brand ERA or was it Remax?
No, I was working for ERA, and ERA's market position, their strategy was to be the alternative for brokers who didn't have the Remax franchise to be able to compete against it. Because, real estate brokerage has always been based on split commissions between the listing agents and the selling agents. And some portion of the listing commission would go to the agent and some to the broker. So a commission would go 4 ways in a typical real estate transaction. With RE/MAX, agents keep the entire deal. They just pay a monthly fee to their broker. So kind of like a Sola Salon today, or a Phoenix Suite for professionals in hair care or other personal services. RE/MAX was like that. It was 100%. You pay your desk cost and everything else is yours on a deal. Well, brokers were finding that the top 20% of the agents in any given market were all moving to RE/MAX, leaving them with problems. And so my pitch to that broker was, okay, well, I have other services that they don't have. I have relocation services. I have home warranties. I have guaranteed sale. I have all these things that you can utilize as feathers in your quiver to compete and say to the person who's not going to RE/MAX, here's why you need to come here. Here's why you need to be here. So I was basically offering recruiting tools through my franchise, and we went out into the marketplaces everywhere that RE/MAX went. We went right behind them. If they grabbed the number 1 or 2 guy, I was going for number 3 or number 4.
I like that. And when I was at Liberty Tax doing development there were certain avatars that we could go after. And I didn't realize it back then. It made it really easy to kind of identify certain future franchisees, and a lot of brands you can't do that with.
Right.
And so I didn't realize how helpful that was. And especially if you have like brokers, I don't know what it was like back then, but you can find their information publicly. So you could start that reach out to them. And if you have a franchise like at Mighty Dog Roofing, we don't have anybody that we can go after like that. So it makes it more difficult. So,
right. So
did you learn anything there that took you that you were able to take to your other roles as well, doing a similar type thing?
Absolutely. And the reason that I think that what you've just called attention to is a very important thing, and it's got a title. It's called conversion franchising. So it's conversion instead of sweeping, anybody who wants to talk to me, I'll talk to them. In conversion, you could drop me into any market in the country and I not know a thing about that marketplace. I not know anything about who the brokers are, but with some early day software that was available then through the multi-list services and what would now be Zillow and others that offer private services. Or even going and picking up a Homes magazine in the supermarket and just looking at who's got the listings in the marketplace. You could pretty well tell who the number 1 or 2 top brokers were, identify your targets, and then put your head down and go. And literally, that's the way conversion franchising worked. It was very proactive. And that proactivity is something that I would suggest to you that more and more in franchising, even if they're not looking for conversion, if you can identify who the perfect franchisee might be for yourself or for your concept, and replicate the successes of those that are already doing those things within your system, then that lead is going to be a far better lead than any portal lead might be, and it will be a much less expensive lead than a broker lead, or paying the price that you have to pay for the higher quality lead because you didn't cultivate it yourself proactively. You had a broker service do it for you at a much higher and steeper price of entry.
So that's an interesting point. And so this will be this tangent that we're going down. I think people that are looking at franchises will find it interesting because they're going to find themselves in one of these buckets. And then franchisors, this is what I'm dealing with right now with Mighty Dog Roofing. And so I think it's important to the ways people find franchisees become franchisees, or they Google something and they get on some portal lead, which is there's a million of them out there, but they're advertising on Google or Facebook. You put your information in, and then they sell that lead to a lot of different franchises that are paying whatever the price is, and then they're reaching out to you to try to sell you a franchise. Some of them are good, some of them are bad. Doesn't matter. That's how you get into their funnel. From a franchisor's perspective, they're looking at that lead as a low quality lead. So you, as a person that's a really good candidate, puts your information in on some portal, and then the franchisor reaches out to you. Just know that they are seeing you as a poorly qualified lead because you're in a big group of poor poor quality leads. And then another way is brokers, where they come in and you start working with a broker, and there's some brokers that are really good, have a great reputation, and there's some that have no reputation, or even worse, a bad reputation. And so that's a mixed bag as well. But depending on who you work with, a lead that's coming in from a broker is going to be seen as a higher quality lead because you've spent time with that broker, and that broker has given your information to a particular franchise. And so it's a warm handoff. And so that's typically a higher quality lead. And then if you go directly onto a franchisor's website and you fill out some information in detail about who you are, and in detail, that is also considered a high quality lead as well. So these are how people find a franchise. But like, what else would you add to that, Stan? I have some other places that I want to go to this, but I've never done this before, kind of given this type of overview. And I thought, with you on, this might be a good time to kind of give an overview of this to people that are actually out there looking at buying franchises.
I will tell you, Eric, that Google has forever changed the way franchise development is done. And it's done so because it used to be the same routine in the beginning, that high quality, low quality, or a tire kicker quality, somebody interested in learning more about a franchise brand might go Google, and literally the way the franchisor mentality was early days before Google, it was, get a little information and then stop them and gate them and force them to give you more information so that you can trade more back with them. Well, today's world, you don't provide me what I want when I want it, I'm going to find somebody who will. And Google is responsible for making that easier and easier on a daily basis. So if you're looking to go and learn about a franchise concept today, you're probably going to be much deeper into your due diligence on that brand or those brands of interest before you even raise your hand and say hello to a representative of that franchise organization. You're 3/4 of the way through your personal learnings about that brand and what it represents, where in the early days it used to be you couldn't get past stage one without kind of providing me with more information. So it has changed. It's changed the brokerage community. It's also changed the direct approach. But today, franchisors must serve up a lot of quality information. Public-facing websites got to give enough information to get me interested to raise my hand and give you more information about how to find me. And you have to find me where I'm wanting to be found, not where you think I ought to be. So franchisors who don't think text is an important vehicle to use in part of their communication because they don't think it's important, you've got to meet me where I am if I'm a candidate. And if I want to be texted to and will respond more quickly to you in text than I might have if it were a web lead, you better be there. You just have to, you can't think through your own head and your own wallet. You have to think through the head of the person you're trying to appeal to. So wouldn't it make sense to suggest that the best way for a franchisor to best approach the marketplace is to know better who it is you're wanting to approach? Use the old Stephen Covey, begin with the end in mind.
Yep. And
know who it is you're looking for. And then how do you find them? Where do you find people like blank? What are they doing when they're not doing your business? If you got a universe of franchisees in your brand already, what makes them tick? Where do they hang? What do they do? What interests them? And go find more of them in places where you're likely going to find a higher population or a pool of opportunity than just, dropping lines in the water and hoping that you're using the right bait.
And that's why it's important to bring on the right people in the beginning, because your first 10 plus 20 franchisees have to be successful if you're ever going to be a successful franchisor. You're only a successful franchisor if your franchisees are successful.
True as that is, though, it doesn't mean that they were the right ones. It just means whether they were or weren't, you've got to double down and hit the gas harder to assure their success in any way you feasibly can. That's correct.
That's exactly it. And then those initial franchisees, look at their background, like really look at their background and start to identify what their background was. What did they do before? Like an example at Mighty Dog, One of our franchisees has a military background, real estate investing background. And so we're looking at that. And is there an avatar? Is there somebody that we can go after, whether it's former military or real estate investors? And as I've started to explore both of those, I'm seeing traction with both of those, and especially in real estate investing. It seems like I was talking to about 4 different real estate investors a few weeks ago that are interested in Mighty Dog Roofing because they want to continue to invest in real estate because that's their thing. And they don't want to have to figure out how to start another company all on their own. And if they can just plug into the Mighty Dog franchise and start that way, it's really easy for them, so they can still focus on their core business of real estate investing and add on another revenue stream for them. And it could be Mighty Dog, it could be a lot of different things. But I think people are starting to look at additional revenue streams like that. So real estate investors is one of those that we're going after. Another hard one, Stan, is project managers. So in the roofing business, we would love to have people that are project managers because there's different projects. That's what an owner will be doing. They're going to be managing 2 different types of people. And so someone that's a project manager will do great as a roofer in general. A roofing business owner, they're not going to be on their roof nailing shingles in, but a project manager. But how would I find that person? It's not easy to identify project managers. And I think a lot of franchises out there are looking for somebody like a project manager, or it's someone that used to be in corporate America, but it's really hard to identify that versus real estate investor or former military. Any thoughts on that, or
Sure.
Real-time coaching to me on that?
I think that the best tool in the world, where it all begins for you as a Mighty Dog or for any franchisor, is to have data points, have a CRM, have an FRM, have a tool like FRM Solutions to help you collect as much data as possible on every data point available to you, from first touch all the way through day-to-day operations. And when you've got data points that you can identify, you can then cross-reference that data and start to build big data from it. You can start looking at the common denominators that exist amongst your quartile. You quartile your universe. What's the top 25% doing that the bottom 75 isn't? What's the top 50 doing? What's the top 75 doing? And you start being able to flesh out information or relevant data points about those that are successful and those that may not be, which helps you then build a better profile of what it is that you're looking for in candidates on a go-forward basis. You marry that with tools like Zoracle Spot-On Profiles and learn from candidates who are interested in your brand, whether they are the wheat or the chaff. Have them do a 10 or 12-minute assessment and learn, does this person share the attributes of the successes that I'm looking for? So when you've got data behind you that can help inform your decisions about people in front of you, when you have a tool like a Zoracle coupled with a CRM like an FRM, and you can utilize the data from both places, what's that going to do? It's going to mitigate risk against bad decisions in terms of your selection. So that's just one avenue, Eric. There are probably a great many in different ways to go, but all of this speaks to what we started with, which is being intentional, being proactive, being informed about what it is you're trying to accomplish, whether you're a prospect for a franchise and you're hoping that you're going to be going to somebody who's sharing your vision, values, and ethics, or whether you're the Zor looking for the common denominators that exist between your successes that are already in place and the new ones that you're looking for.
This has been a great discussion on franchise development. I think we've given some insights into how franchisors select franchisees, how people select franchisors, and how people find franchising, or how franchising found them. So there'll be people that listen to this 10 years from now, 20 years from now, they'll probably be on the podcast and they'll be like, hey, remember that show that you did with Stan? This is how franchising found me. So this will be interesting. I want to shift gears a little bit into what are you doing now? So give us any missing gaps between like how you first got started to where you are today. But I want to kind of land on what you're doing today.
Sure. So as we've discussed, I still put a lot of my time and energy toward FRM Solutions. It's a company that I've been with since 2013. I'm a partner in and have a vested interest in helping my brand grow by helping others do the same. So that's just franchise relationship management is what FRM stands for. It's the acronym for that. And it's software tools built in Microsoft on top of Microsoft Dynamics CRM that are completely customized and made available for franchisors to use in the management of existing or prospective relationships with franchisees. Over the past 2 years, FRM has pivoted in large part from emerging franchisors into the more enterprise level space. And with that, there's been a gap in where my sweet spot in life lives, which is working with emerging ZORs. I've worked with emerging ZORs with passion, as you indicated at the beginning of the podcast. I'm really passionate about helping people mold the clay and figure out how to move on from operating a successful business to scaling it, because it's not the same game. And so a lot of franchisors in the emerging space are those that I have had the most benefit of enjoying working with and helping them figure out how to get to the next stage and be ready for a tool like FRM. But what I'm doing now is continuing with my podcast to speak to an audience of emerging franchisors every week and their executives to help them hear from some of the iconics that have already achieved, that have already hit milestones, and are willing to drop breadcrumbs to an audience of emerging franchisors and teach them things that they would otherwise have had to learn the hard way, or maybe even avoid mistakes that they didn't need to make at all because somebody with more sage wisdom is telling them now, why you don't want to go down that road. Don't do that. So the podcast feeds that. I'm also involved with two other gentlemen who, with myself, have partnered in something called the ZOR Forum. And the ZOR Forum is a concept that enables emerging franchisors to take a seat at the table of a mastermind group of Vistage type or YPO type of a table, where instead of being seated with 10 people that come from various different types of businesses that may or may not have any relevance to yours, the common thread among all the people that will take a seat at that table is they are emerging franchisors. And so their brands may be specific and different from one another, and they are. We won't put competitive people at the same table that are in direct space competition. But each of these guys has that same lonely moment at 3 a.m. when they wake up thinking or worrying about something that's troubling them in their business. And they've got now a peer group of 9 other people just like them that become part of their universe, that become part of their ability to have conversations with somebody who shows them they're not alone. And it also provides a wealth of resources through a backing channel of data that we won't collect from groups and put a library into a Slack channel that's going to put communication resources and information resources and educational resources out there to any member of any group to be able to cross-communicate with others in other groups. We're going to be bringing it to market with chapter directors that are going to be franchisees. As it turns out, we were thinking that this was going to be just us as suppliers, but it looks like we may wind up actually now becoming a franchisor. And we're going to involve those that want to lead groups as chapter managers, and they will be our franchisees, and they can select 8 or 10 people from their universe and seat their own groups. And once a month, they can put a group together for a 3-hour day that's going to help 10 people that were otherwise some of the loneliest people in the world hear from one another, work through problems together as any mastermind group does, but all of these being with the common denominator that everybody working these problems is an emerging franchisor.
I love it. I'm a huge believer in masterminds. I've grown more being a part of masterminds than I have anywhere else. What's frustrating to me currently is people that are in a mastermind and they're not doing anything with it, and they leave it and they go. And I know the path ahead is a path of failure for them, and they have the tools. And this is like people that get into business, get into franchising, you can just see it. They just don't reach out and help themselves. They commiserate with the worst franchisees or franchisors. They have a dark night and they go into a dark place and they never come out of it. And like, there's so much help out there. You're helping emerging franchisors. I'm helping franchisees. And there's an amazing amount of help out there, and people are just not taking advantage of it. They're doing that as entrepreneurs. Like, the best entrepreneurs that are crushing it in business pay a lot of money, $50,000, $100,000 a year, to be in the right rooms with people that are going to help them be better, with no promised results. No promised results of paying $50,000 to $100,000. But they pay that amount of money, Stan, and I've done it. I've been there. I still do it because I know it's up to me to go extract what I need to out of those groups. And it has exponentially increased my business acumen, my connections, and my overall success as a businessman and as a family man. So I'm with you. I'm 100% on board with that. And I cannot wait to see where that goes.
I want to wind the tape back a little further too, and tell you that this all started with the founder of Zor Forum, Dave Paskin, and was the CEO of 101 Mobility when he had the idea of putting a mastermind group together. And the reason for it was that he was one of 7 or 8 franchisors that kind of caught up with each other several times a year at either broker events or at MFV expos or IFA events. They saw each other enough times a year to get to know each other and understand that their brands collectively that they represented in leadership were all in similar stages of early stage growth and development. And they started getting together a half day earlier in front of those events, go have a meal together, share some best practices. But along the way, they realized that this could be a lot more. And so they used the Vistage format. Most of them were very much mastermind centric, from YPO or EO or other organizations like Vistage or the like. But they saw the value that being together as franchisors brought to them. And so Dave brought this idea as he exited 101 Mobility just a year ago last month. He started thinking about what's his next calling in life. And if you go to the Zor Forum website, zorforum.org, you can actually see the videos of all of the others that were part of Dave's group. Alan Young at Shelf Genie, Frank Milner, there were several, College Hunks, Hall and Jung. Each of these guys have their videos up there talking about the impact that Dave's facilitation of this forum brought to them in their business through the 7 or so years that they did this collectively and together. And so when I heard about this, Dave was a guest on my podcast. I interviewed him and I learned about this. I started going crazy. I jumped up and down in my chair saying, how did this not happen yet? How is it possible we can have IFA sectors of the supplier forum, supplier community, where we've got 10, 12 deep, in marketing and social media management and attorneys. And here in an opportunity like this, there's nobody that's doing this in an organized way for emerging, not just any franchisor, but emerging franchisors. And I said, this is insane. We've got to do this. And so myself, Graham Chapman from 919 Marketing, and Dave Paskin are partners in this, and the 3 of us are taking it out, and we can't wait to hit the gas.
I love it. Well, I know where I'm going. I'm going to go to that website, and I think I've got some future podcast guests coming on when I watch that video. I want to shift gears once again to the franchisee side, working with emerging brands, because a franchisee that is a franchisee with an emerging brand versus a well-established brand, it's different. You go in there. And so from your perspective, seeing so many emerging brands, what makes an emerging brand set up for success? Like, what would you bet on? Like, what are the things that you look at? Like, I'm betting on that. I'm sure it's the jockey and the horse, but like, what is it about an emerging brand that you would feel comfortable that this one's going to be a winner?
It's going to be a very easy answer for you, no matter what the brand and no matter what the market segment is and no matter what the secret sauce might be. It's going to be something that you can't visibly see. You won't be able to read about it in an FDD. It's going to be the culture. It's going to be the leadership. It's going to be the mentality and the mindset of the organization's leadership. It's going to be the value of team. It's going to be the understanding that interdependency means that we both have to win, that these unit level economics have to work, and they have to be meaningful. So you can grab that out of an FDD perhaps, but in most cases with early stage franchisors, their item 19 is not defined yet. So I would suggest to you that having a mentality that speaks to the cultural side of the business, as a franchise prospect, I'd be doing my due diligence with a franchisor and literally looking at things that go beyond the blah, 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 why you're the greatest this or why your secret sauce is better than that. I would give a tip to any franchise prospect that's going to make a decision that could be a 15 or 20-year life-changing decision with your wealth and legacy, the mortgage on your home or a second or your 401k at risk. Learn all the things about the brand. And don't fall in love with, don't turn into somebody who uses one side of your brain to make a decision. I learned one thing interviewing you, Erik. You don't celebrate the wins of what you bought. You celebrate the wins of what you exit. And you begin with that end in mind. So don't get too emotionally attached to a single brand. If you find a market segment that interests you, there are probably 15 players in that space that you haven't even heard of yet. Learn about all of them, not just about the one or two that you thought were the ones that you should buy. Could be that the top two players in that space have already sold their territories out where your level of interest might be. Well, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Those two might not have been the best for you anyway. So what you should do is learn what's important to you. Learn what makes you tick. Learn what would get you up in the morning, fired up with passion, whether you never needed another dollar or not. And that would be the right space to be pursuing opportunities in. And then look for companies that share your vision, values, and ethics within that space. Go to discovery days and listen to the talking heads that are going to be presented from different departments within that organization to tell you about why their secret sauce is the best. But on every break, when others are making phone calls or checking their messages on their email or texts, you should take that time to walk around the office and have conversations with the people that weren't introduced to you as important to talk with today. Talk with the kids in the cubicles. Talk with the people that are payrolled, employed, and see how happy they are at this brand. See how they're treated. See how they feel about their jobs. Are they 9-to-5ers, just can't wait to get out the door? Or are they passionate too about what they do? And are they on a career path that their franchisor or employer in their case has put them on? You'll learn more about what you can expect 1,000 miles away from that service center or that corporate office by the people that are sitting there paid to be there, and seeing how they're treated is just an introduction to what you can expect should you invest in that brand and expect support from them from 1,000 miles away. So those are the things that to me will define the growth of that brand and give that brand the opportunity to spread out and have the trust that in a post-COVID world, if trust was ever important before, in a post-COVID world, trust is it. And if you can't have a franchisor worthy of the trust that you've invested in and have this assured knowledge that they too are doing all the right things, all the right ways for the development of everyone on the team, then you may be in the wrong place, but you won't know that until you test it. So the best way to do that at a discovery day is go talk to those hourly employees, go talk to the weeklies, people that are on a salary and see how they're treated, how they feel about the brand.
So beyond C-level executives, management, people that are going to be helping you as a new franchisee, who else, if you had to pick one kind of hourly employee and then one kind of mid-level employee from a position standpoint, or who would that be? Like, who would you go after and look for and have a conversation with? What, maybe it's a role, a position, who would that be?
I'd look at trainers. I'd look at the trainers. What kind of investment has the franchisor put into training materials? What kind of investment is being placed in the things that are going to help assure my success after yes. Everything you show me in marketing to get me to yes looked great. And if it looked great and what I'm going to be trained on doesn't look up to par with that, what have you told me? You've
That's
told me.
good.
Yeah.
One that I think about too, not think about, it's experience that I've had with different brands. And I like that I've owned, a handful of brands, because no brand knows who I'm really talking about. So I can say a brand and they all wonder if it's them. But there was one brand in particular that I owned that their franchisee facing staff, maybe it's like the support person, the person that you as a franchisee had a lot of communication with, once you're open, treated you like their employee. So they're making 10, 15, they're probably making $20 an hour. And they are treating you as a franchisee like their employee versus, respecting you. And to me, what I saw in that goes to your point is that's the culture of the company. They just didn't become that way. They learned that.
Yeah, you can't. You can't talk your way out of situations that you behave your way into. That's another Stephen Coveyism. You can't do that. And I would suggest to you, Erik, that it's more important that you look at the positions or you look at the tools than it is the people, because the people are going to rotate. People are going to change.
Yep.
But what's the investment in infrastructure going to look like? And that's the thing you really, really want to take a close, hard look at, training being that first of those. But don't look at the positions as they're filled today. Look at the positions on an org chart that demonstrate that the franchisor understands the need for a depth of bench in the roles that are important to assure that you're going to come out of the gate well-trained, then properly supported, and held accountable properly for the results that you're expected to be delivered. Because if there's no accountability either, you could be veering off course and nobody's paying attention to that to help direct you to remediation of that problem. Well, you're left on your own to think that what you're doing is as good as it can be, when in fact, somebody ought to have been there to pivot for you or help you see for yourself that you need to make an adjustment.
So if you were going into a new franchise, an emerging brand as Stan Friedman, buying a franchise, knowing what you know now, what would be some of the things that you would be listening for, the words that you want to hear or the tone that you want to hear from anybody up there? But what is what are some of the phrases, the things that you're hearing about the culture, about team, about these different things? Like if you had to put those into some words, what would those be?
COVID-19. It would be COVID-19. I would do nothing more than look at this past year, or a portion of this past year, and the debacle that it wreaked on all of us as havoc, and start looking at franchise relationships that existed over this past year. Have conversations about the business with anybody that you talk to about the business, but have separate conversations with franchisees about how did this look for you? What did your franchisor do for you? Not for you, but with you. What was the first thing that happened in March when the shutdown happened? How did you guys manage that? What did your franchisor do about that? And did they work with you to help with PPP? And did they, what did the ZOR do behaviorally is going to answer those questions more than any words that you can try to script. Or it's real time and it's right now. It just happened. It's so real world that culturally, franchisors that lost money and expected that they would still not turn the key back to the door of their store if they're at a brand where team really exists, where the franchisor really was in the game with them. The franchisor was helping them renegotiate rent or doing things that it would be easy enough to say that's not his job or her job. Your agreement and your FDD said you're responsible for this and I'm responsible for that. Well, all that would have gone out the window this past year at even an emerging brand where team and where trust in the relationship exists and where it's the way it ought to be. Then to me, I would learn all of that and more if COVID can help me do anything good as a prospect for a new franchise, it would help me learn the culture of any brand that I'm considering by just asking those existing Z's, what happened over this course of this year, and how did your franchisor manage through that as it pertained to you?
So Stan, the franchisor's response to COVID has been, I've seen it across the board. I've seen some weaker franchisors have an incredible response and probably renewed energy to be a franchisor. And I've seen some drop the ball. But truthfully, I've seen some of the best come out in franchisors during COVID. But even 5 years from now, that's a good question that people should be asking. Hopefully we're not dealing with COVID 5 years from now. And hopefully I'm still podcasting 5 years from now. But even asking them their response will give you a year from now, 2 years from now, and right now will give you a sense of the culture of what that franchisor is really about, right?
Absolutely. And I think that there are different places and ways that you can view it, but the best way is through those who lived with it and the franchisees that are there and that have been put through a change in life that was as abrupt as you couldn't get whiplash and hurt any more than what happened from one day to the next. How did your franchisor manage through that? Did he do it for you? Did he do it for himself? Did he do it with you? Did he do it with you and your vendors and your suppliers? And what were the adjustments that were made? And obviously, you will have suffered some level of financial interruption, I would think, no matter who you were. But after that early stage, some brands that are best suited for an event like this, those brands that deliver food for consumption off premise, a Wingstop, for example, they grew, but even they had to make pivots and make adjustments. So where was your franchisor's head in real time, in battle? What did you see? Did you see leadership? Did you see, if you were in the trenches as an infantryman, did your leader instill trust, or did your leader, cave and not be sure what to do with himself or how? That's what you want to see.
Speaking of leaders, you've been able to interview some of the franchise greats and be around some of the franchise greats. Who, looking back at just your Rolodex and who you've interacted with, who are some of the people that you have clear, distinct memories of having conversations with? Like, I just took away a nugget from this conversation. Some of the key people in franchising, whether they're alive today or not. Do you have anybody that comes to mind? You're like, wow, that conversation left an imprint on me.
Yeah, I'd say one just jumped right off the page. And it's a guy who probably gets maligned more than he gets spoken of with honor. It's Jimmy John Leotote. Jimmy John was one of the best interviews I can ever remember. And it was because he relived the passion of giving that has so been a part of his life during our interview. Jimmy John said he made, I believe the number, don't hold me to the number, but I believe it was 7. That 7 of the people that began with him in the brand's early days that progressed into management and leadership, he made 7 of them millionaires as he made himself rich. That to me is really, that instills what it's all about. That to me is the mentality of it's a team, and none of us can get there without the other internally and without the other externally, being with franchisees. So to me, that was the most amazing. The interview we did was about benevolence. It was about franchising gives back. It was about the things that you do to go back to the places that were important to you. And now that you can, you do. That to me said a ton about Jimmy John. And then that one sentence about 7 of my managers and they're still here, but they're millionaires. They're millionaires. That to me says as much about a culture as anything could.
Remember John Hewitt talking about making millionaires, and he made a lot of us millionaires and gave us the tools to be able to do that, which was, back then that was a big deal to me to kind of achieve that level of success. And then once you achieve, all of us have achieved different levels of success, but just to keep that in mind of like, it's not just you, and it's not just you making money, and it's about your team and bringing people with you. So I love that. I'd love to interview him one of these days. I'll be able to get to one of these days. What would you say to a franchisee right now that is struggling, a struggling franchisee that is in a franchise with people that are making money, successful, and they are just commiserating with the worst of them? They're telling themselves everyone's unhappy, and that's because that's who they're talking to, and they're not talking to any of the people that are actually doing something about it. What advice would you give to that person? Because we all get into low points at some point. I've been in those places, and I'm sure I'll be at different places again, but I know how to respond. What would you say to that franchisee that is asking you to help them, or they're not even asking you to help them? You just see that that's where they are. What would you do to that person?
I would try to instill a paradigm shift. I would try to help them with a story that I used to share at Discovery Days when I'd bring people in for Wing Zone Discovery Days. And we didn't have an item 19 yet. We had no financial performance representations to offer. But when I got asked about how much money can I make, I would answer that with a question. I'd say, it's not polite to answer a question with a question, but I'm going to beg your indulgence because that's what I'm going to do. And it is a great question. So here's the answer. Let's pretend that you and I are both neighbors, and the only thing separating my house from yours is the fence. We both go into a Home Depot together and we buy a bag of seeds. And I take a bag, half the bag, you take half the bag. We go back to our respective yards and go plant the seeds. Let's get together in about 6 or 7, maybe 8 weeks, go back into the backyards, and let's see what we've got. We go back to my backyard, and we've got a great big ugly weed in the ground doing nothing. We go back to your yard, and there's this huge flowering bloom. Now we're dealing with the same seeds out of the same bag and going into the same ground. What do you suppose made the difference? Could it have something to do with what I did with mine versus what you did with yours? So yours got water, and it got shade, and it got vitamins, and it got attention. And mine got stuck in the ground and said, grow. Now, it's a little bit crass, but it's really the answer to the question, because the question of how much can you make or why are you succeeding and I'm not has a whole lot more to do with what you've done with the opportunity presented to you than the opportunity itself. So really, the answer to your question is it's about the person. And if you're in a brand where everyone is struggling and nobody's doing well, you've got systemic failure. But when people around you are using the same tools as you and are seeing successes that you are not, it's mirror time. It's time for a conversation with yourself, because that's really where you need to take a closer look at what's going on or not and figure out why.
Systemic failure or mirror time. I think people don't, there's very few brands out there with systemic failure. Very few brands out there that have that. And I think if that's you have to ask, is this a brand with systemic failure? And if it is, you need to cut your losses and go. That's what you need to do. And that's what everyone would do in that particular brand if that was the case. Again, very, very, very unlikely that that's actually happening. But I think that's really good to ask yourself, is this systemic failure? Is everybody losing money? And is the runway to make money 5 years, 10 years from now? And if that's the case, then that's reality. But that needs to be confirmed. And if there are people out there that are making money, that are happy, that are doing things, then it's not a systemic failure problem. It's a mere problem. And we've all been there. Like, I think you talk to any of the people that are making money, that are happy, have been where you're at. So what does mere time look like to that person?
Well, that's introspective. I think that person needs to really have a conversation about themselves, about whether or not they've got the ability and the capacity to run their own business. If they can't take the tools if the responsible franchisor is providing you the tools with which to use and grow and follow the marks and follow the systems, and you are struggling with success when you've got a playbook, then you really have to step back and ask yourself, do I belong in business for myself? Or do I need to, if I do, am I trying to sit in seats in my business that are above my pay scale or my competencies? Do I need to have people come into my organization to do the things that they can do that I can't, and enable me to keep doing the things that I can do and I'm better suited to do than anyone else could? You need to take those moments in time to really assess what it is you're about. Again, I go back to his oracle. You should take a profile like that, take an assessment tool and play to your strengths. And literally, there are also some prospective franchisees out there that may do better in brands that are more mature in a given space than an entrepreneurial environment of a young emerging brand where the franchisor is wearing 16 hats and has 24 more jobs to do. And even on a day, if metaphorically speaking, if it were a perfectly clear day and it was an airplane ride with an emerging brand, this is what you're feeling.
Yep.
Even without a cloud in the sky, because it's early stage. You may do well in that concept and you may be in the right space, but maybe you should be at a brand that's got several hundred of those units where every I is dotted and every T is already crossed in the ops manual. No, there's nothing left for you to do but execute. Whereas in an early stage brand, you may have to think more than you're comfortable doing, and you may still have to do things that an entrepreneur might have to do as opposed to a franchisee, and that's maybe why you're stumbling. So there's all those things that's a lot to chew on, but all those things are ingredients in the question that you've asked.
I think you're absolutely right. I know we're coming to the end of our time, but I think that was some gold right there. And if there's advantages and disadvantages to being an emerging brand and a well-established brand. You really I need to do a show just on that, the comparisons between the two, because that's a very, very good question. To sum it up in my words, if you want to be a part of an early stage brand, you're going to, for us at Mighty Dog Roofing, our first franchisees have to be successful, period. And we're going to do whatever it takes. They are the foundation of the brand, and the foundation gets built, and then the brand takes on a life of its own. And if franchisees that come in 2 years, 3 years from now, it's going to be different for them. But everything's different in an emerging brand versus an established brand. We're looking for entrepreneurial people that can handle the growth mode. What would you say quickly the difference between emerging and established to somebody that's like, what should I do? What's the main difference, Stan?
For you as the Zor, I would suggest that whatever you do to help assure that what you've just said again, and you said it earlier, you got to assure the success of those first 10, and you're going to do whatever it takes. Well, they're going to have your personal attention as the first 10. The next 10 and the 10 after that and the 10 after that might start seeing middle-level managers. Just be good and sure that whatever you did for that first 10 got systematized, got archived, got memorialized, and got put into a fashion where it's not you delivering it anymore, but the next 10 are still getting it. Because otherwise, the next 10 and the 10 after that might not have the benefit of the personal interaction that you delivered, and you've left them with a gaping hole. So you need to systematize all of that and make certain that those who follow you are getting the same things that the first 10 did. They're just getting it from someone other than you.
And they're getting version 2, which should be better.
Better every day.
Great advice, Stan. Thanks again for coming on.
Erik, it's been a pleasure being here, and I look forward to actually seeing you on something other than a Zoom call here in the months ahead.
Looking forward to it.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Franchise Secrets Podcast. Whether you're watching or listening, please make sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel and to whatever channel you're listening on. If you want my help with anything from buying a franchise to franchising your business, please visit franchisesecrets.com.